Okay, yeah.
Otto, being a former Rhodesian Air Force person, we had all 8 squadrons. How many squadrons did you have in the South African Air Force?
Well, I'll have to start counting them.
Go for it.
That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, 16, 17, 15. Oh, sorry, I missed 15 with the freelance. 19 squadron.
But can you put aeroplanes to
21. Okay, I can do that.
Yeah, please.
Okay. 1 squadron ended off with F1AZs, 2 squadron Mirage 3s, and now the Cheetah C's and recently Gripen. Then 3 squadron is disbanded currently. They flew F1CZs. 4 squadron Impalas when they were disbanded. 5 squadron Impalas when they were disbanded. 6 squadron the same. 7 squadron the same. 8 squadron the same. 10 squadron flew RPVs and Queen N, remotely piloted vehicles. Then we've got 12 squadron Canberras. 16 squadron was a mix of helicopters, Pumas and Alouettes. 17 squadron the same, then converted to Oryxes. Then 19 squadron was the same Oryxes. They now fly Oryxes and A109s. Where does the Royvolk fly? That's 16 squadron, yeah. So they've now flying Royvolk attack helicopters. Then our VIP squadron is 21. They're still flying actively with the Boeing 737. Something interesting maybe on the 737. I started the project with a phone call that was received from the presidency on December 1999, where they wanted a VIP aircraft to fly non-stop into Europe, because that was the time when Mr. Mandela had massive obligations all over the world, and they had to fly with a hop with the Falcon 900s landed in Abuja in the middle of the night, pomp and ceremony, head of state, and by the time you get onto the other side, you have to be dressed and right out in bushy tail because you walk straight into some other media conference. So they were looking for an aeroplane to fly non-stop from Waterkloof into Europe, and I had to then, it was already the December break, on the 16th, 15th of December, so on the 2nd of January I started writing the staff requirement, followed by an acquisition plan, which I presented to our Minister of Defence around March of 2000. It was approved in one sitting that we could go. The funding for the initial purchase was from aircraft, the C-160s that we had on sale, that had just been sold literally in that period. And the operating money would come from the 60 Squadron and the operating money that they could pull from the Transvaal aircraft that had been taken out of service. Anyway, so that was the 31st of March, which I presented and had approved, because the Secretary for Defence, when I met him in the passage going out, because he had to excuse himself from the meeting at the beginning, he says, when are we going to go and present the acquisition plan? I said, sir, here's the document, it's signed. So his eyes almost popped out of his head. All our military acquisition is done through the Arms Corps Acquisition Agency. We then met with them, and myself and the senior manager aircraft went out on a tender for a 1-month period. We knew that from the history searches that we'd done, 2 aircraft could possibly do it. One was the Airbus A319 VIP aircraft, and the other one was the Boeing BBJ. So we received their quotes. The spec was that it had to fly non-stop from Waterkloof with at least 6 people on board, and all the paraphernalia that goes with the VIP state, the head of state visit, and for 5,500 nautical miles. So in the quote that came back, the Airbus said they've got an aeroplane, but we can only go to 4,000 and something miles, and we're not prepared to recertify the underfloor tanks, because the rear tank was actually blocking the rear cargo hold, and therefore you couldn't put the paraphernalia and gifts and tow bars and spare wheels and things like that. These are things, if you land in funny places in Africa, you need them. Anyway, so Boeing said they prepared to relook at the tender, and they came back, and literally a week or two later they said, listen, we've got a client that has just cancelled one of the BBJ aircraft that they don't want. Well, it was actually an 800 aircraft. Sorry, it was a 700 aircraft. But if we sign up and pay the aircraft off by the end of May, we can get a 15% discount on the aircraft. So from nothing to having an aircraft fully paid and standing in Seattle at Georgetown Airfield at the end of May, that's what it took to get this aircraft purchased. That left just the shell. So then we had to find a final completion center to do the VIP internal suite. And we eventually decided on jet aviation in Basel in Switzerland. And we flew the aircraft out in about November. And about 8 months later, the aircraft was fully refurbished, built, and ready for delivery. Okay, sorry, that was just a sidebar from 21 Squadron.
Yeah.
Then we've got 24 Squadron, Buccaneers, that was disbanded. Also in the Cape, 25 Squadron was a maritime reconnaissance aircraft. They flew Albatrosses and eventually some modified Dakotas. And Shackletons, which sadly were taken out of service and never to be flown again. Pardon? That came to 30. I thought that didn't fit with 35 Squadron with the Shackletons. 42 Squadron.
What happened to 28?
Yeah, sorry. Okay, I'm just running through the numbers. Okay, 28 Squadron flying C-130s and C-160s until they were retired. They now fly the C-130 BZ, which is an upgraded aviation suite, avionics suite, still the same old aeroplane. Airframe-wise and engine-wise, the first flight was done in South Africa in 1962. And they're still going through a next generation avionic upgrade right now, and that will take them to about 2040, they predicted. Okay, then the last ones I think were 42, 35 you said. Then 42 Squadron was a Cessna Squadron, 41 Squadron was also a Cessna Squadron, both of which were sort of retired when the Cessnas were withdrawn. They also flew Bosbooks and Kudus at 41, if I'm not mistaken. And then 44 Squadron was also a transport squadron, flew Dakotas and DC-4s. And yeah, that was about it.
40
And 60 Squadron, that was the Boeing Squadron towards the end. Sorry, the other one?
40 Squadron.
Yeah, okay, 40 Squadron was also a Harvard Squadron. And Impalas, they flew out of Waterkloof until 40 Squadron was there's the last OC.
They were disbanded in 85.
Yeah, so that was the end of that flying. And then 60 Squadron was the Boeing Squadron that we operated in my tour as the Director Combat Systems towards the end of my career. I got 2 of these aircraft back, and we actually got a National Treasury Authority to do cargo flights on days that we didn't use it to resupply our troops in the DRC and South Sudan for reimbursement. Yes, Paul.
Can I ask you a question about your ejection? So, in the operational area, you wore those jackets, right? Survival jackets with the pistol in. So, did that jacket come off? So, I've got a few questions. So, you said you lost your firearm, so I assume a lot of that came off. But then the locator beacon was in the survival pack in the ejection seat, right?
No, it was inside my G-suit.
Oh, inside your G-suit. So did the survival pack survive as well, the ejecting?
Yeah, the survival pack, fortunately, I think helped me not break my back, because it was still attached to me. I didn't have time to let it go. So I thumped my bum right on that. And
So with your located beacon, you could actually speak to Trevor Schroeder, right?
that's correct.
Was he in contact with you all the time until the choppers picked you up?
He was in contact with me until he was relieved by Captain Slade and he was tested.
Okay. So did you move to a landing area where the choppers could land?
Yeah, what I did, obviously, in deciding where I was going to dig myself into some leaves and bushes, was in fact to make sure that there was a landing area that would take at least one of the people there.
And could they home in on your emergency beacon?
They tried, but they were too low, so they weren't able to do that. So Pit van Sail actually directed them towards me, and in relation to the actual smoke from my aircraft wreck, they were able to home in.
So I've got an online question here, or a point of view here, just related to that. It says, the Army sleep under the stars, the Navy navigates by the stars, and the Air Force chooses their hotels by the stars. What's your view?
100%, no arguments.
Otto, sorry. I don't think the Cheetah was ever in combat with the MiG-23, but if it was, how would it have performed?
Sorry,
The Cheetah.
With the new avionics and the canard wing, the way that the Angolans and the Russians flew the MiG-23, we were a good match. Some of our pilots who actually flew Cheetahs went to the Angolan Air Force. Pilot Puma was one of them, if I recall. They started operating the MiG-23 using Western tactics and doctrine, because you could sweep the wings at the moment you were under 4G. The way that the Russians taught is you had to roll straight and level, sweep the wings, and then you could go in. So what that means is that if you want to turn very hard, you get your wings forward so that you have maximum lift. Whereas if you want to go very fast, you put your wings back to be streamlined, if that sort of makes sense.
Yep.
So the bottom line is that if you use that well and you just relax in a defensive turn or even in an offensive turn to 4G and then sweep your wings, because you could intermediately sweep. You didn't have to go from fully back to fully forward. You could set intermediate settings as well. So from that point of view, that would have been an incredible aeroplane. We would have had serious trouble with the two missiles that they carried. They had a very modern radar as well as the AA-11 Archer was a phenomenal aircraft. Our V-3Bs were just, they didn't go anywhere. In fact, Johan Renken fired two of these missiles at the MiG and it just went off. Didn't do anything. He actually shot the one MiG down and the second one that he damaged were both of cannon.
Otto, it's me again. Your Harvards, us poor Rhodesians, we would have loved their Harvards. So all we had were Trojans. Was there ever a plan in the South African Air Force to re-engine the Harvard with a PT-6?
No, the airframe itself, to have modified that to such an extent would have been a ridiculous level of effort. My son, as an aviation, an aeronautical engineer, would I think agree with me. It was just the CFG and everything else going with it. We re-engined our Dakotas with that.
Yeah.
But to be able to get the CFG right, we had to put in almost a meter plug behind the wings to get the CFG backwards. Because the engines were so light compared to the radial engines that we just had to do all sorts of funny things. And then you start hitting vibration, harmonic frequencies, and. So, and then obviously the fuel tanks, they were bladder tanks. In the Cheetah, to do the air refueling, we had the two main tanks are still bladder tanks. And to overpressure those, they will pop, just like that. So your, the safety features that you have to put into that, it was never considered.
Because I used to work at Angolan, Indonesia, where we operated the thrush, SQR thrush commander, and that had the Pratt & Whitney 1340 radio, same as the Hobbit.
Yeah.
And we modified a whole heap of those through sanctions. We put PT6s in, and all we did was took the engine off the firewall and bolted PT6 on.
Well, but you also had to extend the nose.
No.
Because the thrush commanders that operate here have got quite a long pointy nose.
It was a kit.
Yeah.
You just bolted it onto the firewall. You took the Pratt & Whitney 1340 off, and the only one you did was put the battery right down as far to the arse as you could.
Yeah. Well, it's an aeroplane that's built for very harsh conditions. Approximately aircraft. So the Harvard was also, the Harvards were from the 30s, 37, 38. It just got to a point where you started getting fatigue. We in fact had a very nasty incident at 40 Squadron. In fact, before Paul took over, Jeff Law, they went down to Bloemfontein for a bombing exercise as a commander, as one of the citizen force squadrons, and rolling in for a rocket attack. The right wing just ripped off, and he spun into the ground. It was then found that I think there are 37 bolts or so that hold the wing from the outer section to the center wing section that go all the way around, and it has a flange that goes over it.
More than 37.
I can't remember the number, it's a heap of bolts. And what they found when they started opening all our aircraft, they used aircraft from CFS Donata to do their weapons training. The Harvard Mark II and the 3A we could use for weapons. The Harvard 86 didn't have weapon stations on them. But you found that they then, when they started checking our aircraft, some of those bolts were finger loose. Some of them were so tight that they couldn't read it on a torque wrench almost. And when you had a look at what the specifications said in 1937 when it was designed, it said that you had to use a 4-inch spanner, tighten it until you feel tension, and then turn it a quarter turn. That is the torque instruction. Now, depending on a small person, a big person, that could mean anything. And that was the reason. And so, in fact, it was never even considered.
Otto, with your, when you did this reconnaissance run, did you only do one pass over this target when they shot you down? And if you were doing, if you're 190 feet in the bush, how did they detect you? I assume they had the radar on this 57.
The S60 radar variant has got a spinning radar that turns at about 60 RPM, something like that, and it can then track you. So you are up at Angolan. The Earth is as flat you can see tomorrow if you look hard enough. So it is so flat that the height difference between Ruacana and Rundu is something like 35 feet. It's so flat that you can't hide. It's just there. So even if I'd been low, it wouldn't have mattered. I think aircraft that we lost, 2 F1s, we lost in Amoramba, Every, and
I flew over that side.
and Billy van Kopenhagen. They were inside a little riverbed when they got shot up. They were anti-aircraft missiles in the AS-7s.
Sorry, there's a person. I can go back. I'll be with you.
Yeah.
Donna.
Also, with the post-GJ, this Israeli configuration onto our barrage, did we ever get airborne with those Russian engines? Did it come off?
Yes. Before we cancelled it, obviously, it started around 1990-ish, the first concepts of it. As I said, I had lots of visitors coming through Chile that I had to escort from one aeroplane to the next and back. But we did the initials. When I got back in February '94, We just started with the ground runs, and we did our first flight sort of July-ish of 1974. Sorry, 1994, we're not talking about 1994. And we then ferried the aircraft down to Overberg test range. The F1 flew for about 102 or 3 hours, and the Cheetah B flew 17 hours, give or take. What was interesting about that is that on the F1, the RD33 engine gave about a 30% improvement in performance. Takeoff performance, climbing performance, cruising performance. Fuel consumption, more or less the same. On the D2 that we modified, 847 was the number, the nose of the Cheetah had quite a nasty droop. The reason for that was they had to lengthen the nose by almost a meter to get all the avionics in, because the rest of the airplane just didn't have space to put these fancy new computers and the inertial system in to improve the navigation and weapons accuracy. So what we then had is that aircraft with the 09C engine that it came out with was limited to Mach 1.6 because of the actual aerodynamic load on the frame one where this nose was then attached. And you find that with the Russian engine on it, we almost hit Mach 2 with that same nose. So the performance, it added about 60% improved performance on the mule. But this was towards about 1995, and that was just the start of the new generation of political leadership, and our Minister of Defense at the time, Minister Modise, said that it is time to rejuvenate our Air Force and our Navy, and from that started the strategic defense packages that most of the guys from South Africa would know about. And so at that point in time it was decided to actually stop the re-engineering program.
Otto, what can you tell us about the Carver? And why did they think of going to do the Carver as opposed to the Young Lion, the F-16 variant?
Yeah, okay. There's a person who actually worked on it. He was actually part of Project Carver at this Aircraft Corporation. It was a program that was going to use the Otto 9K50 as the propulsion system. Now your F-16 has got the F-100 Pratt & Whitney, so it's got leaves of more thrust. It's like our Cheetah versus the Kafir. The Kafir had the JT-79 engine of the Phantom as its propulsion system, whereas ours then had the Otto 9K50, which had maximum thrust was 15,000 pounds, dry was 10,000 pounds, and your JT-79 had about 18 to 20,000 pounds. So it was a complete difference. But we still were able to get that aeroplane to maneuver at an incredible rate. With the avionics, what we had is that, for instance, in a Mirage 3, if you had to do a dive bombing exercise, the people that were of course on Mirages, if you had a 30-yard radial of your bombs, because it was an iron sight, it was just a little dot that was on your sighting glass, and you had to have exactly 40 degrees dive angle, you had to have exactly 450 knots, and you had to release at exactly 4,000 foot above the ground. If any of those parameters were not there, plus your balance had to be right, so balance through the bomb left or right, and if you bunted slightly to get, your pipper was running up too fast, you wanted to hold it, there went you wrong. So to get a 30-yard radial was in fact not too bad with an iron sight. But when we went onto the Cheetah program, I did all the introductions into service, and I had a guy, you saw him on the one of the photos for you. He came from one squadron, he was my ground attack specialist. So the very first flights that we then took out the aircraft to go and do some bombing practice to see what this would do in preparation for our first course. He rolled in because he was now the specialist, and his bomb went, I don't know, somewhere. I rolled in, my radial for 8 bombs was 8 meters. So compared to 30, and I was not the best weapons pilot at all. So that's the difference. He then came back and says, oh, my aircraft is terrible, there's something wrong, the harmonization hasn't been done. So I said to him, okay, take my aeroplane, it's working. Same result. I took his aeroplane, 8 meters. So anyway, then I said, he was on my PUS course, so he was a classmate. I said to him, Fred, now you're going to be the student and I'm going to be the instructor. And I went out with him and I told him how to fly this aeroplane. But anyway.
Do me a favor, I don't think many people know what the carver was. Just tell them what it was.
Just to come back to carver, it was supposed to be a fighter aircraft that the Israelis at the time were looking at building their own fighter aircraft because they had problems to get F-16s, and they were actually begging for the F-15s, Strike Eagle, E variant. And the Americans were holding back, so they had a young lion program, I don't know what its name was, but in our design bureaus, we then had a guy called Curtis Berger. He led this design team at Atlas Aircraft Corporation, and we were going to put 2 of these Otto 9K50 engines in as a 4th generation fighter aircraft. But again, that was towards late 80s, beginning 1990, and with the Bush War ending, there was really no more drive because no other country in our immediate vicinity would and can pose a threat. So that was then cancelled as well.
I was going to say, did you get to fly the Kavir at all in Israel?
No.
No. I was wondering, because the performance one would be quite different, I should imagine.
Obviously with the extra thrust, yes, but it was heavy. It was a lot heavier. Just as an example now, maybe I could give that, to see what weight does to an aircraft. Towards the end of my tour as Director of Combat Systems in the Air Force, all our dual aircraft were still operating with 09C engines, and all our cheater single-seaters had the 9K50 engine in. So we decided to re-engine the dual aircraft with 9K50 engines. And so, as I said, the 9K50 has an afterburner thrust 15,300 and drives about 10,100 pounds of thrust. The 09C engine, maximum thrust is 13,000 in afterburner and 9,000 and a bit drive. So the very first takeoff out of Atlas Aircraft Corporation, we had, I think it was Des Parker, who was flying the one aircraft, and Ivan Pence was in the other, was in the modified aircraft. And the modified Cheetah with the 9K50 got through 10,000 foot before the other aircraft got airborne. That's how big the difference was. He leveled off at 40,000 foot, and the other aircraft was through about 18 or 20,000. That's how big the difference is. So thrust is an incredible, and it's weight related as well.
You also mentioned that the Cheetah moving that much better than the other fleet. Did that just suit the camels, or did you have big wing slats on that as well?
No, what we had is we had a leading edge, a sawtooth extension, that wing notch. On the wing there was that slot. Outside of that there was a leading edge extension, and that was a wet extension. So you got an extra 100 liters of fuel on the inside, and then so you had a little bit of additional area and had a slight curvature. So you had a little bit of droop on the outer part of your tip, which reduced the vortex just a little bit. But then the most important thing is that with your canard, you went from 13 degrees, I think was the limit, on your Audemars, that green, amber, red lights. It was about 13 degrees was when the motor started screaming at you. With the canard, you could go to 28 degrees.
That was a fixed canard.
Fixed canard.
2 questions. I'm a ground job, not a crew job, so I don't know anything about aircraft. Okay, but I've heard the words design bureaus, modifications, extending those 1 meter, and so forth. So did you do this all in-house and then get the manufacturers, like get the OEMs involved to do the final modeling?
Okay, what I can answer there is at the time that we did these mods, we were still under sanctions.
Yes.
The United Nations wouldn't allow anybody to touch us.
Okay.
So it was all in-house.
In-house.
I know towards the end, Aerosuit, where my son worked at the time,
Yeah.
they took over some of the design authority activities to recertify and to document. Because in the end, it goes about safety. How safe is it? What is the stresses? And.
That's one thing, is the actual nitty-gritty, the mechanical and the design, because when you extend the nose of anything, it changes the whole airflow pattern, it changes everything, which means, is the back end okay now, as opposed to just the front end going continuous way through the atmosphere?
Yeah, so that was all done in-house. At the time, we really had incredible engineers and skills. What was interesting when I was part of about 8 international military cooperation forums, and one of them was with the French. So at one of the meetings, the French head of delegation arrived, and we finished our work, and we were waiting for one of the work groups to complete their work. So I said to this one, "You want to go and have a look at this Russian engine program?" He said, "Yes, I really want to see it." So I went down, and it was at Waterkloof at one of the residents, and he walked around the aircraft and looked at it and says, "Where's this Mirage thing? Where's this modified aircraft?" I said, "You're looking at it." He says, "But it looks just like an F1. And I said, "Yeah, but here's one right next to it. Have a look at the intakes. We cut back the intakes by about 150 millimeters. And then your intake tunnel, because it starts very sharp, and then it goes, it has to take your airflow into the engine. And with that cutback, I have this lip. So we had to rebuild that whole intake. And that whole intake was rebuilt in Actors Aircraft Corporation by our mechanics. The hand skills to this day is just unbelievable. We have people. If you ask anybody if he wants to actually employ a South African engineer or a South African artisan who's really qualified, they'll take them immediately. It's just that extra skill and the passion. And what is more important is that our education system from our universities, because we don't have that many engineers and that many artisans in the country, so your education gives you a wide spectrum, whereas internationally people focus from the beginning into narrow fields of competence, and that's the difference.
And then who owned the intellectual property?
The Air Force.
What are the skills level like now in South Africa? Has it all collapsed, or is there anything left?
No, there are still good skills around, but if you don't get paid, if your company is about to close down, people start looking for greener pastures. So there has been an incredible loss of technical skills, engineering skills, manufacturing skills, for instance, manufacturing capabilities. We used to make armor steel at Schur in Pretoria. Plant is closed. Arsenal Mittal, who owns the steel manufacturing now at Newcastle and Van der Bijl Park and down in Saldanha, they're threatening to close the places down because our ability to run the furnaces, we have power cuts daily, 6, 7, 8 hours a day. We don't have stable sort of government policies. I'm sorry, this is reality. So from that point of view, at every level, the country is regressing at an incredible. That's fact.
Regarding Operation Stand with Rajiv Vehicles flying Mirage, what were the political and military objectives of doing Stand and where did it all end?
Well, the bottom line is that South Africa and Rhodesia were in a very close relationship. So at the time, Rhodesia was under further sanctions or more severe sanctions than we were. So the bottom line was it gave Rhodesian pilots the opportunity class of aircraft, Steve?
Yeah. We never really knew exactly why we were there, but ultimately there were two schools of thought. The one was they were going to form some sort of pact with the Portuguese and in Mozambique, South Africa, Indonesia, and have some sort of combined air force and such. That was one school. I think still the fact that we were getting the Mirage F1 and they felt that the Mirage 3 could come up 3C, which we were the ones which we flew, could come up to Indonesia when the F1s arrived. And then politics changed all that as we got to the late 70s. But that's probably the closest to the truth.
Out of the horse's mouth.
Right, last question. We went for a last question.
If you don't mind me, sorry.
Okay, there are two. Let's take two.
Okay, we'll take 2 questions.
Taking you way back. Vampires. When did South African Air Force stop flying vampires?
Well, the museum still flies one.
So does ours, yeah, but let's be serious.
From a flying point, from a squadron point of view, it would have been in about 1972-ish, 3-ish.
And what squadron?
They were, towards the end, they were the 85 combat flying, 85 advanced flying school. So that was the jet conversion. They had Impalas, they had 3 flights. They had an Impala flight, they had a Vampire flight, and then they had a Sabre flight. And then the Mirage flight came later in 1975-76.
Okay, because Rhodesians were flying them right up to 1980, including T-55s, FP-55s and T-11s from donations. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Right, last question.
Well, I think, from a ground perspective, our ground forces, it was a complete stalemate. In fact, we had planned to really go in across the Quito River and overrun there was 2 Cuban brigades and an Angolan brigade. And our politicians said, no, well, let's hang on a little bit. And in that, the Angolans and the Cuban directions dug in. So they were fortified, they were entrenched, and so the Battle of Quito Carnival, that MK prides itself of beating the South Africans to hide and run away, was never the case. This big Mick Diaries tells that story from the other side. It was just a complete stalemate, and they were throwing artillery shells at each other, trying to cross the river here, trying to counterattack there. From an aircraft point of view, we were literally at the absolute edge of the F1 AZ. It had 14 bombs on board with modifications that we did. It started off with 6, growing to 14 in on one aircraft. But the big problem was we had to do this all at ultra low level because you were in radar contact almost all the time. So the guys were flying, as I said, in little river ditches. The Amarambas are 5 foot 6 foot deep, and that's it. And that's where they hit to get as close to the enemy so that you couldn't get a response from a mixed scramble. One of the very last encounters there, the mix actually got airborne, and our guys outmaneuvered them and ran away. Because that's a very good motto. Every fight you can run away from, you can fight another day.
It's a good job.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Otto.
Hey.